The first sound I registered that morning wasn't my alarm. It was my phone, but it was a different kind of sound. A quick, sharp vibration on my nightstand. Then another, and a third. A trio of staccato buzzes, notifications, bank alerts. My heart didn't start racing. It didn't pound against my ribs. It just turned into a cold, dense stone in my chest. I pushed myself up in bed, my small Portland apartment still wrapped in the gray dimness of dawn. The first rays of sun were just starting to slice through the blinds, painting pale yellow stripes across the wooden floor. I reached for the phone. 3 emails from my bank stared back at me. Alert: a transfer of $20,000 has been processed from your savings account. Alert: your credit card ending in 3318 has reached its maximum limit. Alert: your credit card ending in 5204 has been declined. Before we get into the details of what happened next, I'd appreciate it if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe leave a comment telling me what part of the world you're tuning in from. I didn't really need to open my banking app, but some morbid curiosity took over. I watched the little circle spin as the screen loaded, my thumb hovering over the familiar icon. Savings account, $22.50. Checking account, $91.47. A quiet, sharp little gasp escaped my lips, the kind of sound you make when you touch something unexpectedly hot. My breath caught, trapped somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Everything, every dollar I had painstakingly saved over the past 3 years, the nest egg I was building for a down payment on a house, my just-in-case fund, my future, it had been wiped clean. My hands, surprisingly, were perfectly steady as I tapped the contact for my mother. The phone rang just twice before she answered. Her voice was mellow, almost languid, as if she hadn't just taken a wrecking ball to my entire existence. "Good morning, honey," she said. I didn't say good morning. The words wouldn't form. "The money is gone, Mom." There was no hesitation on her end, no fake gasp of surprise, just a simple bone-chilling declaration. Maya needed it, Clara. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the faint sunlight pushing through the blinds felt like a spotlight. "You took it. You took everything." Her response was so matter-of-fact, so utterly devoid of guilt, that it felt more like a physical blow than words. "You were being selfish," she stated. Maya was in trouble. She was desperate. Family looks out for family. She kept talking, but her voice became a low, indistinct murmur of justifications. Something about Maya's fiancé, Leo, threatening to leave. Something about overdue rent. Something about how I had so much and Maya had so little. I didn't register the individual words. I just heard the underlying message, loud and clear. You don't matter as much as she does. An odd sort of clarity began to crystallize in my mind. There was no space for panic or the hot sting of tears. I had shed enough tears over my family to fill a river. I had screamed into pillows until my throat was raw and felt my heart splinter so many times it should have been nothing but dust. This was different. This wasn't a messy, emotional dispute. This was a crime. I ended the call without a goodbye. My mother had used a key to enter my private space. She had stolen from me. She had weaponized my love and trust against me. And she was utterly convinced she was in the right. I got out of bed and walked over to my small desk. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen that wrote in sharp black ink. I didn't scream. I didn't hurl something against the wall. I started to write. I documented the exact time of the bank alerts. I wrote down my mother's words, verbatim. This time, my response wouldn't be tears and impotent rage. This time, I would have a strategy. For as long as I could remember, my designated role in our family was that of the human safety net. I was the responsible one. the planner, the one who saved. My younger sister Maya was the dreamer. That was the term our mother Diane always used. Maya is the sensitive one, she'd say with a soft, indulgent smile, as if that single word explained a lifetime of chaos. It explained why Maya dropped out of design school after 2 semesters, leaving me on the hook for the non-refundable tuition loan I had foolishly co-signed. It explained why she moved into a chic downtown loft she couldn't possibly afford, and why, a month later, I got a frantic call to cover her rent to stop her from being evicted. My mother never framed these as failures. To her, they were life experiences. When Maya maxed out 3 credit cards on a designer wardrobe for a job she hadn't even landed yet, Diane's logic was, "She needs to feel confident, Clara. You have to believe in her." Believing in Maya, it seemed, always came with a hefty invoice, and I was always the one expected to pay it. I was the family's financial shock absorber, the quiet, reliable source of liquidity for Maya's turbulent existence. Each time, the performance followed the same script. Maya would call me, her voice already thick with performative tears and shame. She'd sob about how she'd messed up again, how stupid she was, how she didn't know where else to turn. And my heart, conditioned by years of this emotional manipulation, would ache for her. I did love my sister. I wanted her to be happy. So I would say yes. I would open my banking app, transfer the money, pay the bill. Then, like clockwork, would come the follow-up call from our mother. She never thanked me, not directly. She would praise me for fulfilling my duty. "Thank you for helping your sister, honey," she would say, her voice radiating approval. "She just needs another chance. You're such a good sister for giving her one." But something began to shift when I turned 25. I had my own life, my own ambitions. I was working 60-hour weeks as a project manager, meticulously funneling every spare dollar into my savings. I had a 5-year plan. I was going to buy a small condo, maybe even start my own consulting business someday. My savings account was the tangible evidence of my discipline, a quiet promise I had made to myself that I was building a life that was truly my own, one that didn't revolve around cleaning up Maya's messes. The system we had was not sustainable. I was enabling a cycle of dependency, and it was draining me, not just my bank account, but my spirit. A deep, simmering resentment had taken root, growing just beneath the surface. Every dollar I sent to Maya felt like a piece of my own future being chipped away and handed to her. The breaking point arrived 2 weeks before my world was systematically dismantled. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. It was Maya. The sobs started before she even managed a hello. "Clara, I messed up," she cried. "I messed up so bad." I sat down heavily on my sofa, my entire body tensing. I recognized this particular brand of hysteria. This was a big one. "What is it this time, Maya?" Her hesitation was brief. Then the number tumbled out in a rushed, panicked whisper. $20,000. The figure seemed to suck all the air from the room. That was more than half of my entire life savings. "How?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "How did you get into $20,000 of debt?" Her explanation was a convoluted tapestry of terrible decisions, a pyramid scheme a friend had lured her into, a string of losses on online gambling sites, a personal loan from a predatory lender with an astronomical interest rate. It was a perfect storm of her worst impulses. "I'm so scared," she wailed. "Leo is going to leave me if he finds out. Mom doesn't have that kind of money. You're the only one who can help me. Please, Clara, I swear I'll pay you back." She had sworn that before, many times. She never had. I listened to her cry, and for the very first time, I didn't feel a pang of pity. I just felt tired. A profound bone-deep exhaustion settled over me. I pictured my savings account, the number I checked every week with a quiet surge of pride. I saw the condo I dreamed of, the life I was trying to build for myself, all of it dissolving into mist. "No," I said. The word was small, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silence of my apartment. Maya stopped crying instantly. "What? I can't, Maya. I'm not doing it this time. I'm sorry." Her voice changed in a heartbeat. The fragile vulnerability evaporated, replaced by a sharp, cutting fury. "You can't, or you won't? You have the money, Clara. I know you do. You just sit on it while I'm over here drowning." "It's my money, Maya," I said, my own voice gaining strength. "I worked for it. You need to start learning how to fix your own problems." "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me?" she shot back. "I'm not abandoning you," I said. "I'm just not bailing you out anymore." We hung up. Or more accurately, she slammed the phone down on me. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was not warm, it was ice. "I cannot believe you," she said, forgoing any greeting. "Your sister called me hysterical. How could you be so cruel? She is your family. I'm not being cruel, Mom. I'm setting a boundary," I tried to explain. "A boundary?" she scoffed, the word dripping with contempt. "You're being selfish. You have a good job. You have savings. Maya has nothing. You are supposed to help her. It's what family does." "No, it's what I do," I said, my voice trembling with years of unspoken frustration. "And I'm done." That single no was more than just a word. It was a declaration of independence. It was me, finally, choosing myself over my sister's endless cycle of manufactured crises. I didn't know it at the time, but that one word had ignited my mother's dormant rage. It had pushed her over some invisible line. If I wouldn't willingly be the family's ATM, she would find another way to make a withdrawal. That night, after I told my mother no, my sleep was restless. I kept replaying the conversations in my head, the venom in Maya's voice, the cold disappointment in my mother's. A part of me, the part conditioned for decades, felt a pang of guilt, but a larger part felt a flicker of pride. I had finally stood up for myself. I naively assumed that was the end of it. I figured they'd be furious for a while, but eventually they'd have to accept my decision. I was so wrong. Sometime in the dead of that night, while I slept, Diane slipped into my apartment. She used the spare key I had given her 4 years earlier when I first moved to Portland. "Just in case of an emergency, honey," she'd said, tucking it neatly into her purse. I had trusted her completely. It never crossed my mind that I would become the emergency she felt she needed to handle. By the time I woke up to those bank alerts, the devastation was complete. My savings account was a barren wasteland. My credit cards were pushed past their limits. She hadn't just taken the $20,000 for Maya. She had taken everything, every last cent. It was a scorched earth tactic. It was punishment. After I hung up the phone with her, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long, long time. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. That was the sickening part. The money was a symbol of my freedom, my independence, my hard work. But in the end, it was just money. It could be earned again. The real wound, the one that went deeper, was the intensely personal nature of the act. My mother had walked into my home, my sanctuary, while I was asleep and vulnerable. She had gone through my personal belongings. She must have found my wallet on the nightstand, my little notebook of passwords tucked away in my desk drawer. She had methodically, deliberately, and without a shred of remorse, dismantled my financial life piece by piece in the quiet darkness. She had treated my home as her own property and my money as her own personal slush fund. A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought about her hands, The same hands that had once packed my school lunches and bandaged my scraped knees, typing my passwords into a computer, authorizing a transfer that would leave me with virtually nothing. I pictured her standing in my quiet apartment, the one place in the world I felt truly safe, and seeing it not as her daughter's home, but as a vault to be cracked open. Panic should have been my first reaction. I should have been screaming, crying, throwing things against the wall. I had less than $100 to my name. My rent was due in a week. But panic felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. It was the reaction she and Maya were expecting. They were probably waiting for my next call, the one where I would be hysterical, broken, and begging. They expected me to completely fall apart so they could swoop in and tell me that this is what happens when I'm selfish. They wanted to cast me as the victim. Staring at the zero balance on my banking app, a strange and terrible calm settled over me. The shock was so profound, it had burned away all the lesser emotions. There was no sadness, no confusion. There was only a cold, hard certainty. I had been treated like a machine for my entire adult life. My feelings, my dreams, my future, none of it mattered. I was a utility, an object, and you don't argue with an object. You don't reason with it. I stood up and walked into my small kitchen. I made myself a cup of coffee, my hands perfectly steady as I poured the hot water over the grounds. I watched the dark liquid fill the mug. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had forced me back into my designated box. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had pushed me too far. They had treated me like an ATM. But they didn't realize that in doing so they had flipped a switch. They had turned off the part of me that was a loving daughter and a caring sister, and they had turned on something else entirely, something cold, methodical, and calculating. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I was no longer their emotional punching bag. I was about to become something much, much scarier, an investigator. Before I could let the rage and hurt fully consume me, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. Not with hugs and empty platitudes, but with a concrete plan. My best friend, Zoe. We'd known each other since college, and while I was the designated emotional sponge in my family, Zoe was forged from logic and steel. She was a paralegal at a prominent downtown Portland law firm and navigated the world with a pragmatism I had always admired. She did what? Zoe's voice was sharp, cutting through the morning fog that had settled in my head. I told her everything, keeping my own voice even and steady, laying out the facts as I knew them. The missing money, the chilling phone call, the spare key. Okay, Zoe said after a long, thoughtful silence. Meet me at the Daily Grind on Larimer in an hour. Do not call your mother back. Do not call Maya. Do not post anything on social media. Don't react. Document. Her words became my new mantra. Don't react. Document. An hour later, I was sitting across from her in a small booth, a now cold cup of coffee untouched in front of me. The air smelled of roasted beans and sugar. A normal smell for a completely abnormal day. Zoe pulled a yellow legal pad from her messenger bag, the same kind I had started my own notes on. Let's build a timeline, she said, her voice all business. Everything you can remember. We started with Maya's call asking for the $20,000 and my refusal. We documented Diane's angry follow-up call. Then we moved to the theft itself. Zoe had me write down the exact times of the bank alerts. 6:15 a.m., 6:16 a.m., 6:17 a.m. The transfers and charges would have been made hours before that, Zoe explained, her mind already 5 steps ahead of mine, probably in the middle of the night when you were dead asleep. First thing we need is a time of entry. My building has security cameras, I said, the thought clicking into place. in the lobby and on every floor. Good, Zoe nodded. We'll go there next. We'll ask for the footage from last night. Midnight to 5 a.m. After coffee, we walked the few blocks to my apartment building. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach as we approached the manager's office. The absurdity of having to ask for security footage of my own mother breaking into my apartment was staggering. Mr. Henderson, the building manager, was a kind, older man who initially had a skeptical look on his face when I made the request. But when I explained that there had been a significant, unauthorized withdrawal from my bank account overnight, his expression immediately shifted to one of serious concern. He led us into a small back office filled with a wall of monitors. He rewound the footage from the camera on my floor. We watched the empty, dimly lit hallway and fast forward. Then, at 12:17 a.m., a figure appeared. It was my mother. There was no mistaking her coat, her purse, the determined way she walked. She paused at my door, glanced both ways down the empty hall, and then used a key to let herself in. She was inside for nearly an hour. She emerged at 1:08 a.m., pulling the door quietly shut behind her. She did not look like a concerned mother checking in. She looked like a thief. "Can I get a copy of that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Henderson nodded, his face grim. Back in my apartment, Zoe had me log into all of my accounts online. We printed everything. The bank statement showed the transfer of $20,000 to an unknown account, time-stamped at 12:35 a.m., 18 minutes after she entered my apartment. Then came the credit card statements, a rapid series of online purchases, maxing out both cards. The charges were for paying off several high-interest loans, all under Maya's name. The timestamps on those payments started at 12:42 a.m. It was all there, a perfect, undeniable digital trail. Entry at 12:17 a.m., theft at 12:35 a.m., paying off Maya's debt starting at 12:42 a.m., exit at 1:08 a.m. Finally, Zoe had me pull up my text messages. We scrolled back through weeks of conversations. We screenshotted the texts from my mother after I had refused to help Maya. "Maya is in trouble. You can't just abandon her. I am so disappointed in you, Clara. Your sister needs you. Don't be so selfish." They established her motive and her state of mind. They were the emotional blueprint for the crime. Zoe took the printed bank statements, the screenshots of the texts, and the USB drive with the security footage, and stacked them into a neat pile on my coffee table. The pile wasn't very thick, but it felt as heavy as a tombstone. It was the evidence marking the death of my relationship with my mother and sister. Zoe looked at me, her eyes serious. "You have everything," she said. "Unauthorized entry, financial records, and text messages showing clear intent. This is a clean-cut case." She tapped the stack of papers with her finger. "You're ready." Holding that pile of evidence felt like holding a bomb. I knew the next logical step was to go to the police. But I hesitated. This was my mother, my sister. As betrayed and furious as I felt, the idea of police officers showing up at their door made my stomach churn. It felt too final, too brutal. I needed to talk to someone who understood the tangled, toxic mess of my family, someone who had been on the inside. I needed to call my dad. My parents, Robert and Diane, had divorced over a decade ago. The split was messy, and for years I didn't fully understand why. My mom had painted a picture of my dad as unreliable, as someone who didn't support her dreams. But as I got older, I started to see the truth. My dad wasn't unreliable. He was just unwilling to be controlled by her. He had escaped the very dynamic that I was now trapped in. We weren't incredibly close. My mom had made sure of that, but we spoke a few times a year, and he always listened. I found a quiet corner of my apartment and dialed his number, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "Clara?" he answered, his voice full of surprise. "Is everything okay?" "Not really, Dad," I said, and the whole story came pouring out. The years of bailing Maya out, the $20,000 debt, my refusal, and then the discovery that morning, the stolen money, the maxed-out cards, the security footage of Mom in my apartment at midnight. I told him everything, my voice low and steady, just like Zoe had coached me. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a silence of shock, but one of deep, weary resignation. He finally let out a long, heavy sigh. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said, his voice filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "I always knew she'd go too far one day. I just hoped she would never do it to you." "I don't know what to do," I confessed. "Zoe says I should go to the police, but she's my mom." "She stopped being your mom in that moment, Clara," he said gently. "She became something else, and you have to protect yourself." He paused for a moment. "Listen to me. Do you remember your grandfather, my dad?" I vaguely remembered Grandpa Arthur. He was a quiet, shrewd man, an accountant who had built a successful business from nothing. He had passed away when I was in high school. "A little," I said. "Why?" "Before he died," my dad explained, "he set up trust funds for everyone. For you, for Maya, and for your mother. He wasn't a fool, Clara. He saw people for who they were. He loved your mother, but he saw her flaws. He saw how she enabled Maya. He was worried about it." A prickle of curiosity ran up my spine. "What are you saying?" "He had his lawyer draft a specific clause in his will," my dad said, his voice dropping slightly. He called it the protection clause. "It states that if any beneficiary is found guilty of committing fraud or theft against another family member, they immediately forfeit their entire inheritance from the trust." I sank down onto my couch, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "What?" "He wanted to protect the family from itself," my dad continued. "The money isn't astronomical, but it's not nothing. Your mother and Maya's combined shares are worth about $250,000. My breath hitched. $250,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. "If the fraud is proven in a court of law," my dad said, his voice clear and precise, "their shares are forfeited. And the will states that in such a case, the forfeited funds are to be redistributed to the secondary beneficiary." "Who's the secondary beneficiary?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "You are, Clara." The room suddenly felt very small, the air thick and heavy. This changed everything. This wasn't just about getting my $20,000 back anymore. This was about a consequence so significant, so monumental, that it felt like it had been written in the stars. My grandfather, a man I barely knew, had seen this coming. He had left me a weapon, a legal shield to protect me from the very people he knew might one day try to destroy me. A wave of emotion washed over me, so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't greed. It was a profound sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. The toxic pattern in my family was so obvious that even my grandfather had seen it and put a contingency plan in place from beyond the grave. The universe had just handed me leverage on a silver platter. My hesitation about going to the police vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was justice, written in legal ink. The next afternoon, Zoe and I walked into the Portland Police Bureau's central precinct. The air inside was sterile, smelling faintly of cleaning solution and old paper. It was a place of stark, unforgiving facts, a world away from the messy, emotional chaos of my family. I clutched the manila envelope containing my evidence, the papers inside feeling both impossibly heavy and flimsy at the same time. This was it. The point of no return. Every step I took on the polished linoleum floor felt like a step away from the person I used to be. The dutiful daughter, the forgiving sister. We were led to the fraud unit, a small section of the building filled with gray cubicles and humming computers. A woman, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, met us at the entrance. "Detective Isabella Rossi," she said, shaking our hands firmly. Her grip was confident and steady, and it gave me a small measure of courage. We sat down at a small table in a windowless interview room. The walls were a dull, institutional beige. I placed the envelope on the metal table between us. The sound it made was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the silence of the room. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was real. I was about to file a police report against my own mother. "So," Detective Rossi said, opening a notepad, "tell me what happened." I took a deep breath, looked at Zoe, who gave me a slight, encouraging nod, and I began to speak. I laid out the story for the third time, but this time was different. This time it wasn't for comfort or for advice. It was for the official record. I told her about the long-established pattern of financial support for my sister, Maya. I explained the recent $20,000 debt, my refusal to pay it, and the angry phone calls from my mother, Diane. My voice didn't shake. It was as if recounting the facts had created a protective shell around the raw, wounded part of me. When I got to the morning of the theft, I pushed the envelope toward her. "This is the proof," I said. Detective Rossi opened it and laid the contents out on the table. She looked at everything methodically, her expression unreadable. First, she examined the printed bank statements, her finger tracing the line that showed the $20,000 transfer. She noted the time, 12:35 a.m. Then she looked at the credit card statements, the rapid-fire succession of online payments made to loan companies under Maya's name. Next, she picked up the screenshots of the text messages from my mother. She read them slowly, her eyes lingering on the words. "You can't abandon her. Don't be so selfish." Finally, Zoe handed her the USB drive. "This is the security footage from the hallway outside her apartment," Zoe explained. "The timestamp of entry is 12:17 a.m. Detective Rossi took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. We all watched the small video screen in silence. There was my mother, her familiar form moving with a furtive quickness down the hall. We watched her use the key, slip inside my apartment, and then emerge an hour later. The detective watched it twice. When the video finished for the second time, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me. For the first time, her professional mask softened slightly, and I saw a flicker of something that looked like sympathy. "Well, Ms. Peterson," she said, stacking the papers back into a neat pile, "your friend is right. You've got an airtight case." She broke it down for me in the blunt, clear language of the law. Unauthorized entry into my private residence. A clear chain of evidence showing a large sum financial transfer made without my consent during the time of the entry. Text messages that established a clear and compelling motive. Credit card statements that showed the stolen funds were immediately used to benefit a third party. My sister. "This isn't a family dispute," she said, her voice firm. "This is financial exploitation. It's theft, and we take it very seriously." A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I had been so afraid of not being believed, of being told this was just a private matter to be handled at home, but Detective Rossi saw it for exactly what it was: a crime. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "I'll file this report and open an official investigation," she said. "Given the clarity of the evidence, we'll move quickly. You can expect to hear from my office soon. We'll need to interview your mother and your sister." By the time Zoe and I walked out of the police station, the sun was beginning to set, painting the Portland sky in shades of orange and purple. The world looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours ago, but everything had changed. The gears of the justice system were now turning, set in motion by a stack of papers and a grainy video. That night, I sat in my apartment, the silence heavier than it had ever been. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the charged electric quiet that comes before a storm. I had done what I had to do. There was no going back now. The downfall was coming. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended state of quiet dread. I went to work, answered emails, and sat in meetings. But my mind was elsewhere. I was waiting for the inevitable phone call, the explosion of anger and disbelief from my mother and sister once the police contacted them, but the call never came. The silence from their end was absolute. Instead, on the 3rd day, I received a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. "Clara, it's Leo, Maya's fiancé. Can we please talk? It's important." My stomach twisted into a knot. Leo, he was a kind, steady man who, for the past 2 years, had seemed completely blind to Maya's manipulative nature. I couldn't imagine what he would want to talk to me about. I agreed to meet him at a small park near the Willamette River, a neutral space far from the confines of our family drama. When I saw him sitting on a park bench, I barely recognized him. The easygoing smile he always wore was gone, replaced by a deep-set exhaustion. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat down, his voice rough. "Is everything okay, Leo?" I asked, though I was fairly certain it wasn't. He shook his head, staring out at the slow-moving river. "Nothing is okay." He took a shaky breath. "The police came to our apartment 2 days ago. They wanted to talk to Maya and to your mom. Here it was, the beginning of the storm." "What happened?" I asked quietly. "It was a nightmare, Clara," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disgust. "Maya completely fell apart, crying, screaming that you were trying to ruin her life. Your mom was just as bad, calling you a vindictive, ungrateful daughter. I defended them. I told the police it must be some kind of misunderstanding. I believed them." He looked down at his hands, clenching and unclenching them. But it didn't feel right. The way they were acting, it was too frantic, too rehearsed. That night, after the police left, Maya fell asleep. I couldn't settle down. I had this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "So I did something I've never done before." I looked at her phone, her texts with your mom. My blood went cold. "I thought I knew her, Clara," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought she was just a bit lost, a bit irresponsible. But what I read, it wasn't just irresponsible. It was cruel. It was calculated." He pulled out his phone, and my breath caught in my throat. He had taken screenshots. He showed me the screen. It was a text exchange between Maya and my mother from the night of the theft, right after I had refused to give her the money. Maya, she said no. I can't believe she actually said no. "Mom, don't worry, I'll handle it. She's forgotten who's in charge." Maya, "What are you going to do?" Mom, "I still have the key. I'll go over tonight after she's asleep. Where does she keep her wallet?" My own sister. She hadn't just been a passive bystander, a damsel in distress that my mother was trying to save. She had been an active participant. She had helped plan it. She had told my mother exactly where to find my cards, where to look for my information. Then, Leo swiped to the next screenshot. It was the one that broke me. "Mom, are you sure she won't fight this? What if she calls the police? Maya, she won't. She'll cry and be mad for a week, but she won't fight it. She never does. She never does. Those 3 words were the most damning indictment of my entire life. They were the summary of my role in our family. I was the reliable one, the pushover, the one who would always eventually give in. They had built their entire plan on the foundation of my perceived weakness. Leo looked sick. She was joking about it, Clara. Joking about ruining you, thinking you'd just roll over and accept it like you always have. It was all a plan. She was never going to pay you back. She felt entitled to your money. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it stole the air from my lungs. This whole time, I had held on to a tiny, foolish sliver of hope that Maya had just been a desperate, misguided beneficiary of my mother's terrible decision. But she had been the architect. I ended the engagement this morning, Leo said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. I packed my bags. I can't be with a person like that. I can't be part of a family like that. He forwarded the screenshots to my phone. They were the final piece of the puzzle, the irrefutable proof of premeditation and malicious intent. It was the evidence that obliterated any lingering doubt, any shred of guilt I might have felt. Leo stood up to leave. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said, "for everything, for not seeing it sooner." I watched him walk away, a good man escaping a toxic system. I sat on that bench for a long time, staring at the words on my phone screen. She never does. A cold, hard resolve settled in my bones. They were right about one thing. The old Clara, the one who cried and forgave and forgot, never would have fought back. But she was gone. They had killed her themselves. Weeks later, I sat on a hard wooden bench in a courtroom at the Multnomah County Courthouse. The room was formal and imposing, with dark wood paneling and a high ceiling that seemed to absorb all sound. It smelled of old books and floor polish. The air was thick with a heavy, solemn silence. I had never felt so small or so powerful in my entire life. Zoe was beside me, her presence a quiet, steady anchor. My dad was on my other side. He had flown in from Phoenix that morning, telling me on the phone, "You're not doing this alone." Across the aisle sat my mother and sister. They looked nothing like the confident, self-righteous women who had berated me over the phone. They looked utterly broken. My mother, Diane, seemed to have shrunk. Her normally impeccable clothes were slightly rumpled, and she stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, her face a pale, blank mask. All of her fight, all of her justification, had evaporated under the cold, harsh light of the law. Maya was even worse. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She kept twisting a shredded tissue in her hands. Her fiancé was gone. Her financial safety net was gone. Her entire life, built on a foundation of manipulation and other people's money, was collapsing in on itself. She looked lost, a child finally facing a consequence she couldn't cry her way out of. They didn't look at me, not once. Their lawyer had advised them to plead guilty. The evidence I had provided, especially the text messages from Leo, was so overwhelming that a trial would have been a long, expensive, and unwinnable humiliation. Pleading guilty was their only option, their only hope for a more lenient sentence. The bailiff called the court to order, and a stern-looking woman with graying hair took her seat at the bench. "The Honorable Judge Carolyn Hayes presiding," he announced. My heart pounded as Judge Hayes read the file in front of her. She looked over the top of her glasses, first at my mother and sister, then briefly at me. Her expression was unreadable. "The case of the people versus Diane Peterson and Maya Peterson," she began, her voice clear and strong, filling the quiet room. The defendants are charged with 1 count of unauthorized entry and 1 count of financial fraud. She looked directly at my mother. "Diane Peterson, how do you plead?" My mother stood up, her movement stiff. "Guilty, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maya Peterson, how do you plead?" Maya could barely get to her feet. "Guilty," she choked out, the word dissolving into a sob. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of finality. This was the sound of the truth finally being spoken aloud in a place where it could not be denied or twisted. For my entire life, their narrative had dominated. I was the selfish one, the difficult one, the one who didn't understand family. But in this room, under the sworn authority of the court, their story had no power. The facts were all that mattered. Judge Hayes looked at them with an expression of deep disappointment. "I have reviewed the evidence in this case," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "The premeditated nature of this crime is particularly disturbing. You didn't just steal money. You exploited a position of trust and familial love in the most cynical way imaginable. You violated your daughter's home, her privacy, and her security, all because she had the courage to set a healthy boundary." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. My mother flinched. Maya sobbed harder. The sentence was delivered without ceremony. "For both defendants, I sentence you to 3 years of probation. You will complete 200 hours of community service. You are ordered to pay full restitution of the $20,000 to Ms. Clara Peterson within 30 days. And finally," she added, looking at them pointedly, "you will attend mandatory family therapy. Though I suspect the family you need to work on has been irrevocably broken by your actions." It was over. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. As we filed out of the courtroom, I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to yell or cry or tell them how much they had hurt me. I had already said everything I needed to say through the pile of evidence I had gathered. The truth had spoken for me. In the weeks that followed the court hearing, the consequences of my mother and sister's actions began to ripple through their lives with devastating force. The 30-day deadline for restitution loomed. They scrambled, borrowing money from the few relatives who would still speak to them, to scrape together the $20,000. The wire transfer appeared in my account on the 29th day, a silent, legally mandated apology. It didn't fix what they had broken, but it was a start. The real blow, however, came from the clause my grandfather had so wisely put in place. With my dad's signature next to mine on the legal documents, I filed the trust forfeiture claim with the estate lawyer. We submitted a certified copy of the court's conviction. The process was cold, swift, and impersonal. There were no emotional appeals, no room for negotiation. It was a simple matter of contract law. 60 days later, I received a letter. The forfeiture was complete. Diane and Maya's shares, which after legal fees and distributions came to $165,000, had been officially and irrevocably redistributed to me, the secondary beneficiary. The money appeared in a new investment account I had set up. I looked at the number on the screen, feeling not a thrill of victory, but the heavy weight of justice. This wasn't a lottery win. It was a reclamation. It was the cost of their betrayal, calculated down to the last dollar. The fallout didn't end there. My mother worked as an office manager for a dental practice, a job that required a background check and a clean record. Her criminal conviction for fraud made her position untenable. She was quietly let go. At 52 years old, with a criminal record, finding new work was nearly impossible. Lily's situation was just as dire. The terms of her probation required her to be employed, but finding a job with a fraud conviction was a monumental task. The shame of what she had done, combined with her broken engagement and financial ruin, sent her into a deep depression. About a month after the funds were transferred, my phone rang. It was my Uncle Paul, my mother's brother. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Clara," he said, his voice heavy with a forced, placating tone. "I was just talking with your mother. She's having a very hard time." I waited, saying nothing. "She lost her job," he continued. "Maya can't find work. They're really struggling, honey. I was thinking, maybe you could find it in your heart to help them out, just until they get back on their feet. That inheritance money?" A cold fury so pure and sharp, it felt like ice in my veins, rose up inside me. He was asking me to use the very money they had lost through their crime against me, to rescue them from the consequences of that crime. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. But I didn't yell. I didn't let the anger control me. I let the silence stretch out, making him uncomfortable. "Clara, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here," I said, and my voice was unnervingly calm. "They're struggling, you said." "Yes, terribly," he said, relief flooding his voice, thinking he had gotten through to me. "So was I said quietly. "For years, every time I had to drain my savings to fix a mess they made, every time I had to put my own dreams on hold. I was struggling then. Where were you?" He was silent. "The only difference," I continued, "is that when they struggle, it's a family crisis that everyone needs to solve. When I was struggling, it was just my duty." I didn't wait for him to respond. "Please don't call me about this again," I said. And I ended the call. Then I opened my contacts list. I found my mother's name. I pressed block. I found Maya's name. I pressed block. I found Uncle Paul's name. Block one by one, I severed the ties. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It wasn't empty. It was the clean, quiet, expansive peace of a space that had finally been cleared of toxicity. It was a silence I had fought for. It was a silence I had earned. 6 months later, I stood on the edge of the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The vast, layered expanse of rock and shadow stretched out before me, a breathtaking testament to time, pressure, and erosion. It was beautiful and immense, and it made my own problems feel appropriately small. It was the first real vacation I had ever taken. A solo trip I had paid for with money I had earned and saved since the court case. My life was quiet now, and orderly. The inheritance sat untouched in a long-term investment account. I didn't see it as my money, not really. I saw it as a fire extinguisher hanging on a wall, a tool of last resort, a symbol of a fire I had survived. My real wealth was in my paycheck, in the steady, reassuring rhythm of my life. I'd started seeing a therapist a few months ago. In our sessions, I finally found the language for what I had experienced. My therapist helped me understand that the guilt I sometimes felt was a conditioned response, a phantom limb of the role I had been forced to play for so long. "You built boundaries, Clara," she told me during one session, "not walls. Boundaries are not a betrayal. They are an act of self-preservation. They teach people how to treat you. And I was finally learning how I deserved to be treated." My friendship with Zoe had deepened. She joined me on weekend hikes in the mountains around Portland. Our conversations easy and filled with laughter. She never once said, "I told you so." She just showed up, a constant grounding presence. One crisp autumn afternoon, as we sat on a peak overlooking the golden aspen trees, she looked at me. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "you didn't destroy your family." I looked at her, surprised. "You stopped them from destroying you," she finished. Her words landed with the simple, undeniable force of truth. That was it. That was everything. I hadn't been the agent of destruction. I had been the agent of cessation. I had simply put a stop to the damage that was already being done. Back in my Portland apartment, my life settled into a new kind of normal. I poured my coffee in the morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows of a home that was finally, truly mine. A sanctuary. I logged into work, finding satisfaction in my own competence, in the life I was building for myself, by myself. The silence that used to feel like a precursor to a storm now felt like peace. I no longer waited for the next panicked phone call, the next manufactured crisis. I no longer lived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering when the next withdrawal would be demanded of me. I had lost a mother and a sister. It was a grief I knew I would carry in some form for the rest of my life. But I had gained something far more precious in return. I had gained myself. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. The freedom was absolute. Real wealth wasn't the number in an investment account. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was finally, completely, and unapologetically free from people who confuse love with control.